Welcome back, everyone, to our deep dive into the REdefine Imaginify framework.
Great to be back.
This is session 3, and today we're digging into something the sources call Cultivating the Internal Architect. Sounds intriguing.
It really is, and it builds directly on what we covered last time in session 2. We spent quite a bit of time then focusing on, the external triggers REdefine Imaginify points to for sparking creativity and imagination.
Absolutely. We covered a lot of ground there. We talked about those environmental triggers like liminal spaces.
Right, the waiting rooms, airport terminals, train stations, those kinds of places.
Exactly. And the argument wasn't just that they're dull, but that they actually do something useful. They break the pattern, they pull you out of your normal routine, and that frees up your mind to wander a bit, make different connections.
It's that disruption, that little jolt out of the everyday that seems key according to the sources.
Yeah. And then there was nature.
Nature wasn't just about chilling out, though. The sources highlighted its role in promoting what they called effortless attention.
That soft focus state, right? Like when you're walking in the woods or just watching the ocean.
Precisely. And the reason that's important, according to the material, is that it actually reduces mental fatigue. It sort of clears out the noise in your head and opens up valuable cognitive space for imaginative thinking. You're not forcing it.
That idea of clearing space really resonated. And speaking of making connections, we also discussed narrative cross-pollination.
Ah, yes, that one. It sounds a bit complex, but the way the sources described it felt quite practical.
It did. It basically boiled down to deliberately, actively looking for stories, visual styles from really different areas.
The example they used, which stuck with me, was reading some really dense sci-fi and then, immediately going and looking at Renaissance art. Very different things.
That contrast, that collision, that's the important part, isn't it? The sources were pretty clear on this. They said the clash, the collision of different creative ideas isn't bad. It's actually productive.
It's not just about liking different things. It's about the friction between them being useful. You force your brain to kind of bridge the gap.
Exactly. And that whole discussion led us to a pretty fundamental question we left hanging at the end of session 2.
Right. If all these external things, the weird spaces, nature, mixing up your cultural diet, if they're so powerful, does creativity just become a matter of finding the right external stimuli? Are we just puppets of our environment?
Or is the really crucial work happening inside? Is it more about our ability, our internal capacity to actively find those inputs, choose them, mix them up, and synthesize something new from them? Where does REdefine Imaginify land on this?
And the framework gives, well, I think it's quite a profound answer, actually. It suggests that while, yes, external triggers are vital, they're the raw material, they set the mood, the real work, as they put it.
Yeah.
It's undeniably internal synthesis.
Okay, let's pause there because that feels significant. So it's not quite enough to just say, sit in an airport lounge or look at contrasting art styles. The benefit depends on what we do with that internally.
That's exactly it. It comes down to our capacity, our ability to not just passively receive these external things, the ideas, the images, the feelings, but to actively find what's relevant, choose how to engage, mix it with our existing knowledge and experience, and ultimately transform it all into something fresh.
So the triggers are out there, but we need the internal machinery to actually use them effectively.
You could put it that way. The sources suggest the balance lies not in passively waiting for inspiration to strike via the perfect trigger, but in actively cultivating that internal machinery so we're ready to leverage those triggers when they appear.
And this is what they mean by cultivating the internal architect.
Exactly. If you accept the starting point from the sources, that creativity is this process, synthesis, transformation, taking stuff, combining it, making something new, and that this process thrives on rich, varied inputs to work with, then the logical next step is that we have to become the architects of that internal process. We have to build and manage it.
You can't just be left to chance. There was a phrase in the material that really jumped out at me here. Being a curator almost for your own brain, a curator of inputs.
Yes, I like that too.
That sounds very active, doesn't it? Like a job you consciously do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It pushes back against the idea that this internal capacity is just some fixed talent. Instead, it's presented as something you develop, you cultivate. It's an active, quite deliberate effort to build your ability to select, process, and transform the stuff coming in from the outside world. You're not just a sponge soaking it up.
You're the builder, choosing the bricks, deciding on the design.
Well put.
So, okay, if we need to cultivate this internal architect,
Yeah.
how do the sources suggest we actually do that? They lay out some specific active ways to engage.
You do four key ones, really. And the first one kind of flips the script on how we might think about just consuming media or art.
Oh, how so?
Well, it suggests that the internal architect sees consuming creative works, reading books, watching films, listening to music, whatever, sees it not just as downtime or entertainment,
Mhm.
but potentially as active creative work.
Okay, that's a big shift. So watching a movie isn't just passive enjoyment. It can be part of the creative process itself.
Exactly. The idea is the internal architect isn't just passively absorbing the final product. They're engaging with it as raw material. They're mentally pulling it apart a bit.
Like looking under the hood.
Yeah, seeing the components, noticing interesting structures, character arcs, visual tricks, narrative techniques, and actively thinking, how could I use that? They're mixing and matching to spark something totally new. This active mindset, the sources argue, turns consumption into a source of fuel for your own creativity. You're building your mental toolkit.
Right, so you're engaging with everything you take in with this sort of creative, maybe even deconstructive eye, looking for bits and pieces you can potentially use later.
Interesting.
What's the second key engagement?
The second one is the intentional seeking of diversity.
Ah, okay, this links back to what we said earlier.
It does. The internal architect doesn't just passively wait for different kinds of art or stories or ideas to cross their path. They actively, intentionally seek out diversity. They don't stay in their comfortable lane.
This feels like the active version of that narrative cross-pollination we discussed. It's not just happening to you, you're making it happen.
Precisely. It means deliberately forcing your brain to deal with these really different forms and ideas. Go back to the sci-fi and Renaissance art. The internal architect purposefully seeks both, maybe even because they seem so unrelated.
Why? What's the benefit of forcing that?
The sources argue that this deliberate exposure is what actually forges those new neural pathways, generates fresh insights. If you only ever consume, say, contemporary thrillers, your internal architect has a very limited palette. Seeking out, I don't know, ancient poetry or experimental film
Yeah.
that dramatically expands the range of materials you have to work with internally.
And presumably, forcing those different things together isn't always smooth sailing. It can feel a bit jarring.
It absolutely can. Which leads directly into the third key engagement, embracing collision and clash.
Okay. So don't avoid the discomfort.
Exactly. The internal architect doesn't shy away when different ideas, styles, or even values seem to conflict or rub against each other in their mind. They actually lean into that friction.
Because, and we keep coming back to this quote from the sources, the clash, the collision of different creative ideas, that's actually productive. It's seen as necessary, not problematic.
Absolutely. It's framed not as a bug, but a feature of the creative engine. When your internal architect has to grapple with how, say, a concept from quantum physics might relate to a theme in a historical novel, that struggle itself, wrestling with the apparent incompatibility, is what can spark something genuinely new.
It forces your brain off the usual tracks.
Precisely. That deliberate exposure to difference and the willingness to actually sit with the discomfort of that clash is presented as crucial for moving beyond just variations on existing themes and generating truly novel ideas. Your internal processor is being challenged in a useful way.
Okay, so we've got active engagement with inputs, intentionally seeking diversity, and embracing the resulting clash. That all seems focused on the material the architect works with. What about the workshop? The environment we talked about in session 2?
Good point. That's the fourth key engagement. Mindful selection of environments.
Ah, so it's not just being passively influenced by your surrounding.
No, it's about being proactive.
Yeah.
It's about the internal architect being deliberate in choosing environments, understanding how different places tend to affect their state of mind, and crucially, knowing how that mental state connects to their internal creative work.
So it's not just luck if you find yourself feeling creative in a certain place. The architect might have intentionally put themselves there.
That's the idea. Knowing that those liminal spaces we discussed might encourage a wandering, pattern-disrupting mindset, the internal architect might deliberately choose to, say, brainstorm on a train commute or spend half an hour in a quiet cafe, specifically because that mental state is good for certain kinds of creative thinking.
Or seeking out nature.
Exactly. Recognizing that nature fosters that effortless attention and clears cognitive space, they might intentionally schedule time outdoors, not just as a break, but as a strategic move to prepare their internal state for deeper creative work later. It's about mindfully choosing the environment, to support and optimize the internal process you want to engage in. You're consciously setting the stage.
It really feels like all four of these active consumption, seeking diversity, embracing clash, mindful environments, they're all about taking control, taking agency.
I think that's a great way to put it.
You're not just waiting around hoping for inspiration to strike, you're actively building the conditions for it, both in the what, the inputs, and the where and how, the mental space.
That's the core of it, yes. The essence of cultivating this internal architect, as REdefine Imaginify presents it, is making that shift, moving from being a passive recipient of whatever stimuli comes along
Hoping something sticks.
to becoming an active agent. An agent who strategically curates inputs, intentionally seeks out difference, embraces the productive friction that follows, and mindfully selects environments to support the whole internal synthesis operation.
And the sources seem to conclude that it's the combination of these things that really matters.
Yes, exactly. It's the synergy. The strategically chosen environment combined with the actively curated and processed input, that's where REdefine Imaginify suggests the real creative spark ignites. It's the meeting point between those external triggers we explored last time and this cultivated internal capacity to actually use them, all managed deliberately by you, the architect.
Wow. Okay. This whole dive into cultivating the internal architect really drives home the idea that creativity, according to these sources at least, isn't just some magical gift or random luck. It's a process, something you can actively work on and get better at.
It definitely reinforces that. While getting interesting external inputs is crucial, it's your internal ability, your cultivated skill to synthesize, transform, and leverage that diversity that really powers original creative work. That skill is what makes the triggers truly effective.
Which brings us very neatly to the provocative question that REdefine Imaginify kind of leaves us wrestling with. A question for you, the listener, to really chew on.
If this capacity we have to synthesize and transform diverse inputs is presented as being so central, so critical to creativity, then what specific practices, what habits, maybe even small ones, can you start cultivating, maybe starting today, to enhance your own internal curating and cross-pollinating abilities?
How can you become a more effective, more deliberate architect of your own internal creative world? How can you get better at actually leveraging all those fascinating external triggers that REdefine Imaginify points us towards?
A great question to ponder.
Definitely something powerful to sit with. Think about that, and we'll continue our deep dive next time.